Hello and welcome to interest.co.nz. I'm Janae Tibshirani and today I'm joined by Authorised Financial Advisor Martin Hawes. Thank you for joining us, Martin.
Hi, Janae.
Look, today I wanted to talk to you about a situation I think a lot of New Zealanders are in at the moment. They have a bundle of savings, but it's not enough to use to buy a house, or they're too scared to put their hard-earned cash into the property market with all the volatility at the moment. What is your message to these people?
You know, you can have a good life without owning your own home. And we're talking about home ownership here, we're not talking about rental properties or anything. You can, if you look around the world, there are lots of people in lots of countries that don't demand home ownership. The real trick, I think, with people who decide not to own their own home for whatever reason, is that they will find that they have more cash left over at the end of each month. Because from a cash point of view, home ownership and renting a property is it takes far less cash. You don't get any capital gain, but it does take less cash. Now, the difference between ownership, mortgage, rates, insurance, maintenance, obsolescence, the difference between them needs to be saved. Because the trouble is that young people get a message that says, this is the cost of my home, I'm renting, and I can spend everything else. Well, they can't. If they want to keep in the same financial position as a homeowner, they have to make sure that they save that difference between ownership and renting.
That's a really good point you make. I mean, being in that sort of age demographic, I see a lot of people that people are travelling, they're spending money, they're supporting all the restaurants and bars and Ponsonby and all that sort of thing. They're not putting that money towards houses.
No, the message is that they can have a ball. And when you do long-term numbers between home ownership and renting, there's not too much difference between them. Now, we've just had a boom and that will skew the figures, or we are having a boom, I should say. That will skew the figures between the two. But from a strict financial point of view, home ownership is probably not that much better than renting and saving the difference.
Sure.
The really good thing about home ownership, though, is the discipline that is imposed on you by the bank for the mortgage. Because banks get really grumpy if you don't meet your mortgage repayment schedule. Whereas nobody gets grumpy if you don't save that difference between renting and home ownership costs.
You're right. And look, in terms of what to do with that money, you've recently written about, I guess, your hesitations with the share market at the moment, and we've got the prospect of Donald Trump becoming the president of America, we've got slowing growth in China, Brexit, there are a lot of uncertainties at the moment. You know, do you think this is a good time for newbies to be entering the share market?
It's a really difficult one. I have lowered risk personally on my own portfolio because I see a lot of risks out there, the least of which is actually Donald Trump. I don't like the idea of him becoming president, but I'm not that much driven by it. I'm worried more about what's happening in the South China Sea. I'm really worried about Brexit and how that's going to play out. I'm worried about the Auckland housing market. When I look around New Zealand, I'm worried about our biggest export being dairy. So I'm concerned about all those things, and I've therefore lowered risk. I've gone from owning 50% of my portfolio in shares and property, and by property I mean the property trust. So I've come down from 50% to 40%. And that's just Martin being a bit cautious.
Sure.
Now I've advised my clients to do the same and help them do the same. So it's a bit of a sell down. It's not a wholesale exit. You know, back in 2008, before the GFC, I got really concerned, and we sold everything. We sold every share and every property trust that we had. I'm not doing that at the moment because you can actually make a very good case for shares at the moment. A market is really an organised argument between the bulls who are positive on the one hand and the bears who are negative on the other hand. And these two argue it out all the time. And I always think that whatever position you take, you should be able to make the case of the other side. So I've got a little bit bearish, but I can make the bull's case. And the bull's case for shares is simply that the equity risk premium, that is the difference between what you'd get for a close to risk-free investment like a government bond or something, the difference that you get between shares and that and a government bond is about right, because interest rates are so low, they're likely to stay lower for longer than anybody ever thought, and therefore shares with their superior and greater dividends deserve perhaps to be up there, and that might be sustainable in the long term. Now, I'm worried about lots of other events that could befall us, and therefore I've lowered risk.
Okay.
But if you look at, by some historic valuation method, particularly the price-earnings ratio, shares look very expensive, but not when you look at the equity risk premium. So I've made the bull's case to you, even though I'm quite bearish at the moment. So my advice to that young person who's saying, well, I'm not going to buy a house, they're too expensive, it's all ridiculous, but I've got $75,000 saved. My advice to that person would be to make sure that they save enough, because the savings rate almost always beats the investment rate. That is, the amount that you can put aside is almost always more important than the rate of return that you'll get on it. And the second thing I'd say is that you can't beat some diversification. Younger people can afford to take more risk, but they should still have some diversification, because we never know what economic or political event might happen, and the different asset classes, shares, property, bonds and cash, perform differently depending on what happens. So diversification gets you through any adverse event that might happen.
Sure. Okay. Look, Martin, something else was the New Zealand Stock Exchange. This has been, the NZX has performed really well. Returns have been around 23% growth over the past year. Do you think it's overvalued?
Well, I'd go back again to that equity risk premium. You know, interest rates are very low in New Zealand certainly by the standards of my lifetime. You know, looking from the 70s and the 80s and the 90s and so on, we had much higher interest rates. So this feels very low to me. But again, that equity risk premium appears to be about right on a price-earnings ratio basis. It does look really expensive when you look back at what price-earnings ratios used to be, and now you look at it and you think, oh, you know, that's got me a bit nervous. But they are sustainable at that level. My problem is that New Zealand's got some vulnerabilities at the moment. We're based on construction, we're based on immigration, and we're based on tourism. And those three things are the big players in our economy at the moment, and each of them is quite brittle. You know, each of them could slow down or stop at some point. Construction's the least likely, but if immigration slowed, then construction would slow. And tourism's always quite a fickle sort of industry. So we've got a strong economy at the moment. I watched Stephen Joyce yesterday talking it up, and I thought he made a very good case. But the three things that are really big in our economy, they could stop at some point.
Sure. And yeah, it's the sustainability of what's driving our growth at the moment.
And again, for my money, I've just lowered risk a little bit.
Okay.
You know, it's not that I'm thinking there's going to be a big crash necessarily, and with a bit of luck, nothing may happen. That would have me. But I think it's just a time to keep yourself firmly grounded, I guess.
Sure. Look, and speaking about risk is peer-to-peer lending. This is something that's become, you know, really trendy around the world. But quite a few growing pains, I guess, have emerged, and Harmony has been in the news recently. It's about to plead guilty to some charges put forward by the Commerce Commission. I'm just wondering what your thoughts would be on this, whether now is it in fact a good time to jump into P2P?
Well, I suppose that I should disclose that I have a very small investment with Harmony, that because I wanted to see how P2P lending worked, I put a couple of $1,000 into it, and I've invested that, and it seems to have all worked pretty well. I'm always a bit concerned when I run my eye down the list of people who are wanting to borrow money, because it says what they want to borrow it for, and it's it's house repairs and it's holidays and it's and it's stuff that I wouldn't be borrowing to buy. But what really is happening with P2P is that you are taking the bank out of the middle, because a bank is really just a middle man or a middle player, and it takes money from depositors and it lends money out to borrowers, and in sitting in the middle it makes a very good assessment of the borrower's capacity to repay. And so with P2P, you're sort of making that assessment yourself, or Harmony's doing some of it, but you're looking at it and you're thinking, I don't even know this person. I don't know the person's age. I don't know much about the person's financial capacity or their income or what they spend or anything that they do, their personality, such like. Whereas certainly for bigger amounts of money, the bank will actually sit down with somebody and make the assessment on the basis of the person's character, the person's collateral or security, and the person's cash flow. I'm not doing that. So it will be very interesting. I can't give you a black or white answer, but it will be very interesting to look back in 20 odd years to see if the banks are really adding value by sitting in the middle between people who want to deposit money and people who want to borrow money.
Sure, that's a really interesting point. Look, Martin, finally there's KiwiSaver, and if we go back to our initial sort of premises of what people should be doing with the extra maybe 10, 20, 30, 200,000 they might have, do you think it is a good option to throw some more in towards KiwiSaver?
Not generally, because KiwiSaver is not liquid. So if you throw, you get an inheritance from your grandmother or something like that of $10,000, and you think, well, if I put that out of harm's way and I can't touch it, and you put the $10,000 into KiwiSaver, you can't touch it. First home, serious illness, serious financial hardship, and a few things like that. Otherwise, it's locked up until you're 65. Now sometimes that works for people who lack the discipline, and if they put it into a bank account or they put it into some other kind of investment, they can get at it, and they will get at it. But I think those people are few and far between. I think people shouldn't use KiwiSaver for general savings.
Sure. All right, Martin. Well, we'll leave it at that. Some key points then. I think that message about maintaining that level of saving, even if you're not putting it towards a mortgage, you should be saving it and putting it towards something else valuable is really key. So
yes, it is.
Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. And I'm Janae Tibbs-Shirani from interest.co.nz.